Welcome. My name's Tricia Glass. I'm Executive Director at Quiet Communities. Thanks for joining us this afternoon for this latest QC close-up conversation. Today, you'll hear from two residents from Colorado Springs who are leading a local effort to challenge a new, very loud outdoor concert venue that's really threatening quality of life in their once quiet community. QC founder Jamie Banks is with us and will moderate, and I'll turn things over to her.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Today's speakers, Matt Grubesic and Murray Reef, are talking about a problem they've been confronting in their community in Colorado, the Ford Amphitheater. It's a large outdoor concert venue that is adversely affecting surrounding residents. Loud outdoor music events are a growing problem across the country. At its heart, it's a development story in which developers are allowed to establish venues in residential areas with little understanding of the nature of the noise and how it will travel. This can occur under zoning and permitting frameworks that treat noise as a minor nuisance rather than a serious and ongoing intrusion. While such venues bring revenue, jobs, and entertainment, the costs fall on residents and are rarely considered. A few things to know before our speakers begin. Amplified music contains prominent low-frequency components that travel long distances, penetrate walls and windows, and are very difficult to mitigate. They intrude upon people's lives, eroding quality of life and the ability to enjoy one's own property, even with doors and windows closed. Standard metric, the A-weighted decibel, underweights those low-frequency components that are largely responsible for the impacts residents are actually experiencing. In other words, it's an insufficient metric. Concerts generally occur at night, and nighttime noise is known to be especially hazardous to health. It fragments sleep and triggers the body's stress response, increasing heart rate, stress hormones, and blood pressure. Now I'll introduce our speakers who will tell you about the situation, their experiences, what they've learned from their fight, and how they've helped similarly impacted communities around the country. Matt Grubesic is a community organizer and advocate actively engaged in addressing the impacts of noise pollution on local residents and families. He has been involved in organizing community efforts related to the Ford Amphitheater's high noise levels and their effect on neighborhood quality of life, health, and well-being.
Matt, are you ready to go?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Trish. So we've resided on the Front Range of the Rockies for 25 years in a community that is across from the Air Force Academy on 18,000 acres. And we're going to explain the community impact this concert venue has had on residents, both in the city of Colorado Springs and in El Paso County. And my colleague Murray Ralph is going to explain the sound metrics, and I'm going to go through some of the local recordings and some of the political structure that was able to put this in place, where the residents were skeptical from the beginning. It all started in 2024. You can go to the next one. There's also a 72-acre conservation easement that separates Colorado Springs from El Paso County. It's considered Smith Creek, with a prime wildlife habitat. There's roughly 50,000 residents that call this area home that are being negatively affected and have been here, some of them, for 50 years. The neighborhoods were here before the Ford Amphitheater, and this all started in 2024. Next slide, Rach. So this is to give you a better view of what we are dealing with. The highlighted area shows the amphitheater down in a bowl. To the west of that would be the Air Force Academy. And you could see all the existing family neighborhoods that have been here for decades and how it's negatively being impacted. The area is called Polaris Point. It was originally meant for open air shops and restaurants. And through the zoning process and zoning changes, the amphitheater came to be. We fought this from the beginning, very skeptical on the noise mitigation, the sound mitigation. and we are no longer a quiet community. The residents showed up in numbers to oppose the venue and ask the important questions about an outdoor concert venue, and the answers we were given were not the result that we are experiencing. City Council has ignored our constituents' concerns over the last 3 years, and these residents here are mainly being impacted. The city has allowed venue to monitor its own noise, and it is something that has exceeded Colorado Statute 2512-103, which is a noise ordinance that is impacting us, and the amphitheater has been able to play music as loud as they wish. Next slide. I went over that one, Rachel. So this is an example of the concert last Thursday, roughly 1.5 miles from the concert venue, and a local lady recorded this and posted it on Nextdoor. If you'd like to play it. You need to click on the speaker, lower right. Families can't put their kids to bed at night. They're having issues sleeping. The ones closest to the amphitheater can hear it inside their homes. Where we're at, 1.8 miles away, at least I could shut our doors, and we barely hear it inside, depending on the band that's playing that night. Here's another recording of the same night. This individual lives down the street from me. As you can see on the meter, the noise was reaching 80 dBs, which is totally unacceptable. It's right here. This is not just affecting individuals, human beings. This affects the animals, domesticated animals. The entire area is being inundated. Now, this next slide shows a Instagram post from 2024. And if you wish to review it at a later time, there's numerous recordings of what was going on in 2024, particularly the next slide. This is roughly a 5-iron from my house. This was recorded on, you could see 8/18 of 24, and it was absurd. Here, it's right here. Try having a barbecue on your patio with your grandchildren or your family or your friends with this noise blaring. Now, the community opposition. We've contacted the city council. We've done everything we were supposed to do in regards to what the cities had suggested. The next slide, Rachel. There we go. December 2024, after that concert season that you just witnessed, the mayor had a town hall where over 400 residents showed up, including the owner. And they basically disregarded all of our concerns. Until this day, 2026, the noise pollution has not changed. The complaints continue to come in. We had filed the most recent lawsuit, and yesterday the judge voted in our favor to not dismiss the case, which was very enlightening on our behalf. You just have to have the tenacity to continue to do what's right, and eventually the truth will prevail. In a most recent Colorado Supreme Court decision, Hobbs versus Salida, the Supreme Court ruled in our favor that for-profit entities cannot be issued a noise hardship waiver, and that's how this venue has been skirting the law, the state statute 2512-103. So after the Supreme Court case was determined in our favor, the venue lobbied some local senators in the state legislature to pass a bill 26-098, and we ended up as a group getting that bill denied from a bipartisan group that understood the impact this was truly having on the residents. We got more of a response from the state legislature that we're getting from our own city council, which was rewarding. Now Venue has decided to create a nonprofit for 2026 because all of their attempts to get a for-profit entity issued a hardship waiver failed. So now they are, we still can't figure out how they became a nonprofit. And I'm laughing, but I shouldn't be. Anyhow, the city issued them another hardship waiver for 2026. And that has allowed them to exceed the ruling of the Supreme Court. So some community organizing tools, actions, like you just saw. Instagram works great. We organize community opposition to Senate Bill 26-098, and we had conference with numerous legislatures. And just keep in mind that you need to stay as a group, small group, and be effective. Don't give up when it comes to something like this. That's something we have not done. Next slide, Rach. So residents have purchased their own sound monitoring tools to measure the decibels. We funded our own independent sound study. There's a Ford Hurts Families email campaign since Ford was taken on as a sponsor for this venue, and a noise map, which is very damning. A local resident had created this, and it allows any individual to go in, click on the area their home is, and put in the experience that they have witnessed. We have over 700 of those in regards to that. And this is a phenomenal tool. If anyone ever needed that, please reach out to Jamie, and I could pass along that information to have this monitored, because this is another positive impact if you ever do go to court. And eventually the truth does prevail. The public has proven an ongoing experiment at the expense of their health and quality of life is no longer an option. We've had it. So stick to your gut, and things will pan out. It just takes a while when you're up against a big corporation. Word got out. 2 developments in Yukon, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma City were voted down by that city and their city council due to our concerns and what has transpired in Colorado Springs. 2 other venues have been delayed due to sound mitigation, and the venue is also having an issue with its stock. If you wish, you could go to Seeking Alpha. I included that in the slide to see just what's been going on with we call it financial engineering to stay afloat. Next slide, Rach. Oh. And yes, what we learned, it does take a village. Get a better understanding of your local zoning and land use laws if you ever come up against this. Never let them succeed in getting it built, regardless of who you're up against. Look into city codes and state codes when it comes to the approval process. Otherwise, you'll be chasing it like we are. Having expertise in sound basics is a definite must. And if your state does not have any noise statutes, lobby your legislatures to get those introduced and passed, because this will be damning to your health and your local communities. And relationship building with your politicians. I've met a lot of politicians that I never thought I would meet. And it's been a wonderful experience. And creating a liaison like Quiet Communities is very important, because they supported us at that Senate hearing at the state legislature when Senate Bill 098 was voted down. So I applaud them. Thank you.
So Murray Reef is a retired diagnostic radiologist. In 2023, plans were announced for the Ford Amphitheater to be built approximately 1 mile from his home. Like many nearby residents, Dr. Reef initially assumed existing laws and regulations would adequately protect the community from excessive noise impacts. However, after the venue opened, persistent noise concerns led him to become engaged in community advocacy. In 2025, Dr. Reef relocated to Monument, Colorado, citing noise from the amphitheater as the reason he moved. Okay, Murray, please go ahead.
I kind of took an interest in more of the technical side of it, which is going to be important for any community that has to deal with this. Is you have to start to learn the lingo and what to look for, and it's kind of like whatever you're in life, I guess. The more you know, the more you find. So I think that's kind of an interesting first point. So next slide. So this was a slide from the approval process that the theater company venues submitted to City Council for the approval process. And I thought it was kind of interesting to start here because you look at this slide, it's kind of innocuous. This is exactly what that the end there means notes live. So this is venue. And you see the red arrows, 50 dBA for residential, and then they have another red arrow for their 47 was their estimate for what they believe their concert stores to be in the communities. And so everybody in the council's like, well, they're below the permissible limit, everything's fine. And so they approve it and life is great, except that there's some things here that aren't readily apparent, which I thought we'd talk about. So the first thing is the first table is taken from the Colorado Springs ordinance, but it's basically also taken from the Colorado State statute. So the first thing you notice is that the residential limit that venue has put is 50. Well, actually for periodic impulsive noise, which concert music is, it should be 45. So they purposely used the higher limit to give themselves a bit of an advantage. The next thing is that if you notice, there's no metrics, and there's also no averaging times. So once you get into this, you realize that saying 50 dBA doesn't really mean anything. Is that a 50 dBA as an L max, as a maximum limit? Is that an integration time, like for a minute or 5 minutes or 15 minutes or 60 minutes? So just to say something is 50 decibels is totally incomplete. You have to state if it's an L max, or you have to state if it's over a certain average time, and if so, over what time was that average. So what you find also is that to state a maximum permissible limit, you have to use a short average time, either an instantaneous level or like a 1 second LEQ, or you have to use a percentile metric like L1. It does you no good to do what venue did, which is in the lower table. All the numbers in the lower table are 5-minute averages, whereas in the upper table, everything would be basically short integration times like on the order of a second. So basically what they've done here is compared apples to oranges. So it's very misleading to state that, well, 47 decibels, well, that's a 5-minute average, which means you could be hearing stuff up into the 60s or maybe even 70s, as long as your average was 47. So looking at the lower table, a couple things here. The main point about this lower table is that the venue presented this in a way that underestimated the impact that the theater would have on the community. The first thing, if you look to the far right, where it says overall the 100 dBA, their operational levels are 105 dBA for 5-minute averages and 110 dBA for L max. So they used a lower level to calculate their estimate. Using that, their unmitigated estimate for the community was 64 dBA as a 5-minute average. Okay, so actually that should be more like 69 to 74 dBA. The next thing is if you look at the very bottom between the 61 and the 47, they attributed 14 decibels of broadband sound mitigation to their sound wall, which our engineer from Dudick Engineering states is totally unrealistic. Sound walls do not operate that way. Sound walls only work locally, and particularly in this case, where you have 300 to 600 feet elevation in the communities, the sound just goes right over the sound wall. And so the 14 decibels of broadband attenuation from the sound wall was totally unrealistic. And the third thing here is, if you notice on the left of the table, the low frequencies are typically 20 to 200 hertz. So the lowest they used was 63 hertz. There's the lower, and than that, there's 16 and 31.5 hertz. Of course, as Jamie pointed out, the A-weighted network pretty much subtracts those out. But again, if you notice, for the 63 hertz, they use a front of house sound level of 109, and the operational parameters are 125 dB for low frequencies for the LMAX and 115 for the 5-minute average. So if you do the math, what you'd find is that the 63 hertz would be up in the 83 to 93 decibel range for unmitigated bass. And again, sound walls cannot mitigate bass. So next slide. So this is what we got. So the very first concert, we got 50 to 78. This was from the newspaper. So they have their red arrow on 47th, but the newspaper and the city say, nope, we got 50 to 78. And of course, nobody cared. So next slide. So the bottom slide is from the concert on June 3rd. That is a tracing that we took at a home a mile from the theater. The top slide is a non-concert ambient level, which was taken last year at the same home. The yellowish at the bottom is the 40 to 50 range. The red is 50 to 60, and the orange on top is 60 to 70. The non-concert ambient level typically just gives scattered areas, usually from car pass-bys or breezes, in the 40 to 50 range. And you can see there's a huge difference between a non-concert night and a concert night. And in fact, if you notice between these two, the L90, which is a percentile metric that measures background, was raised 11 decibels between, in this example, from the non-concert to the concert. And the 10-minute average was raised 18 decibels from 43 to 61. So this concert had it at the very end, an LEQ 10 minutes of 61 decibels. And just the green arrow is interesting to point out that when the concert ended, the levels dropped about 45, which is exactly what we have found our average to be for LEQ ambient in that area is 45. So basically they went from, it was 70.9 was the L max to 45. Okay, next slide. So I found this in the Audio Engineering Society. This is kind of interesting. So we're talking about these decibel changes, really significant changes, 5, 15, 25 decibel, just huge changes of community decibel readings. And so this is how people respond to changes of sound level. And typically in this 4 to 5 range, people start to do something different. Here the red is I turn the player off. The green is I'd adjust the volume, and the I do nothing, the blue line just plummets. So basically people start to respond in this 4 to 5 decibel range, maybe 6, and we're seeing decibel changes 15, 20, 25. Okay, next slide. So just a few things about noise and health. The one thing that theaters try to have people believe is that this is just a minimal nuisance, but it's not a nuisance. I mean, noise is a stressor. It's kind of like having a stressful job. They say a stressful job can kill you. Well, so can noise, and any kind of stressor can wreak havoc on your body in terms of activating your fight or flight mechanism through the sympathetic nervous system. It's basically it goes through your limbic system. Here they talk about the amygdala. And basically, but all this stuff triggers this cascade, this process of stress hormones and cortisol release that have this wide-ranging effect on the body. This slide basically talks about the chronic exposure to lower level noise basically has the similar effect as higher level noise, and that it activates this hypothalamic pituitary axis, causing fear, anxiety, inflammation in the body. Okay, next slide. So I'll just read off a bunch of things: stress, psychological triggering of PTSD, sleep disturbance, increased heart rate, that's the sympathetic nervous system, changes in immune system, it's mainly related to the cortisol. Anytime you're stressed and the cortisol goes up, it blunts your immune response. That's one reason why people get shingles when they're stressed. Anxiety, annoyance, mood shifts, the cortisol production, again, hypertension, heart attacks, vasoconstriction, hypertension, and the elevated adrenal levels. Next slide. So we talked about cardiovascular. I thought the diabetes was kind of interesting. It says for every 5 decibels increase, the risk of type 2 diabetes increases by 6%. So as it turns out, the fight or flight mechanism also has this issue of causing insulin resistance, which I think is kind of interesting. Next slide. So one question is, how does sound get out of the theater? So this is an open air theater. It has a 28-foot sound wall, except in the middle where it's 56 feet, which is related to a restaurant. The problem is that basically most of the theater is open. Straight line sound just goes right over the wall. And particularly here where the receptor premises are a couple hundred feet higher than the wall is basically useless. Sound diffracts, and also sound moves in terms of wind and temperature inversions, which is related to refraction as opposed to diffraction. Next slide. So this is from one of the Department of Transportation slides showing that beyond 500 feet or so, the sound walls just simply do not work. And this is well known. Next slide. So this is a collection of slides from, this is venue data, so this is theater data. The top slide is a comedian. And so this is an interesting slide in that you can see that the green lines or the green dots are the lowest averages, the lowest LEQs. And they basically have a linear fit. There's no music here. This is just a comedian. Nobody heard anything. The one yellow spike was an aberration. It was on all the sensors. It had nothing to do with the event. And you can see what the typical pattern for a community in terms of their soundscape would be, starting in the mid 40s, and by the late night it's around 40. And if you look at the 2 lower slides, this was from a band called Slightly Stupid. And if you your eye just has to run across that to see how the curve is totally disrupted, really significant changes, sometimes 15 to 20 decibel swings. 5-minute average is well over 50 decibels in many cases. And you're basically in an area where the ambient should be like you see on the top, maybe like 40 to 45 decibels. So these are considerable events. And one more slide I think is left. Right. So the take-home point is something that Jamie talked about, is that this is from Audio Engineering Society and also the community noise from the World Health Organization. Everybody just focuses on the sound level, and they use the LEQ, the continuous level equivalent. And that's really a problem, because all the sound engineers know that an A-weighted LEQ predicts response of perceived loudness and annoyance poorly. The quote below is from the World Health Organization. And the reason is that sound is, there are 5 parameters that govern response. And one is sound level, but you also have frequency content, and the LEQ doesn't address frequency content. Time variability, such as periodic and impulsive features, is a huge parameter of annoyance, and the LEQ does not address that. Duration of sound is also related to annoyance, and the LEQ doesn't address that. And finally, the context, the context in which the sound is heard. So the LEQ addresses none of that, but yet it's often used as the sole parameter for addressing compliance. And that's all I have.
Murray, thank you so much, and Matt as well. I have a leadoff question, and that is, really, what is the ultimate? You've had your recent legal success. What is the ultimate goal? I mean, do you feel that you'll be able to ultimately have it shut down, or are you hoping to have hours limited? I think it'd be helpful to understand.
We would just like them to abide by Colorado Statute 2512-103, which is the law, that they cannot exceed 50 dBs after 7 o'clock at night. That's basically it. We're asking them to lower the volume, and it's just not happening.
And if that happened, do you think the community would accept and the presence, maybe not embrace, but accept that venue?
Well, I mean, I think that basically this is a problem because from the very first slide, it was obvious that putting a facility such as this 1 mile away from residential areas was going to be fraught with problems.
Yeah.
So really, to me, I mean, there's only a couple ways to fix this. One is turn it down. The other is to put a roof on it. And but there are some other ways that I think possibly could be addressed. For instance, there is something called virtual bass. I've read some things about, sophisticated things they can do with sound equipment that they can find a way to have less impact, in the communities. Another way, maybe even something like a clamshell on the back of it where you wouldn't actually cover it, but kind of have like a clamshell thing swooping up over part of it or something. But, ultimately it's really for the theater to decide how to fix it. I mean, to me, it's no different than if I was speeding down the road and a cop stopped me and I started saying, well, I've got this and this and this, and I'm tired and I'm upset. And he's like, you need to follow the law. That's what the policeman's going to say. And that's just what it seems to me is that the venue has a lot of money and that it's up to them to figure it out.
We have a question. This person is curious to hear examples of other communities that you've heard of who are similarly impacted by local outdoor concert venues, and sort of to understand, have there been resolutions or sort of where are they in this effort?
Well, Trish, if you are a nonprofit, the law in Colorado allows you to play music as loud as you like. So for instance, have you heard of Red Rocks, which is west of Denver? It's a beautiful concert venue. That's a nonprofit. Fiddler's Green is another nonprofit. The communities did have similar issues with the noise like we are having here, but due to that nonprofit exemption, they realized that the noise was a problem and they came to the table and did create options for the community, whereas we'll end the concerts earlier, we will tone down the music. So they did appease the local community. But outside of what we're experiencing, there has been no appeasement. So the option, I guess what you're asking is, if you're a for-profit, which we've only dealt with this here, they need to follow the law and not abide by a city that is giving them a hardship waiver. I know of no other issues so far, although there was a problem down in Florida when they opened an open air theater, I believe in the 90s, and that ended up getting shut down. And go ahead.
Well, there was I can't remember the examples, but we actually did one of these, AI searches of venues that had problems like this, and a whole bunch came up, 20 or 30, but I can't remember them right away. One I think was in Texas. What was it? White something or other. But anyway, most of the venues do have problems. that they just simply do. Then the nature of their existence is problematic in creating these industrial noise levels with this base that can travel for 5 miles and be absorbed by homes and rattle windows, et cetera. That's a problem. I don't really understand why outdoor venues are actually still being allowed. I mean, we stopped allowing indoor smoking. We stopped leaded gasoline. I don't exactly understand why this type of thing is still allowed, but nevertheless it is. But some of the other communities have had some success in turning things down. Sometimes they make massive fines. I think this one venue in Texas, I think, had like a $20,000 fine for one violation. But I mean, there has to be a willingness to try to work, on. I mean, you cannot have, for instance, the venue here won't even acknowledge that the noise they're creating is periodic impulsive noise. They won't even acknowledge that. And so, I'm not sure how you handle that when the offender won't even acknowledge the obvious fact that music and the human speech is periodic noise.
Mhm.
So.
And could one of you just clarify that nonprofit clause, how that works, just to make that clear, why a nonprofit
Well,
can,
so
yeah.
basically the idea was, I guess in law, they like to give any kind of governmental run operation a pass, which is a little problematic, but nevertheless, that's the way it is, that they let anything that's state owned or municipal owned kind of get a pass. And also they've done that for nonprofits. But typically, if you think about shows that are run by cities or nonprofits, it's not so much this industrial noise kind of thing. It's a lot more like festivals or folk groups or something like that. It's not like Godsmack, or something like that. So I think that's kind of how that worked. The deal with the nonprofit thing is a nonprofit is exempt from state law. It is not exempt from regulation by municipal law. The problem that we've run into here is that the city doesn't care. So they're basically let the theater write their own compliance agreement. And so the agreement was written such that it cannot be violated. So, and when you complain to the city just doesn't respond.
So
Also, municipalities, they're not going to have 3 or 4 concerts a week. You might have some festivals twice, 3 times a year. And I think that's what the nonprofit is kind of geared towards. But it seems like in the state of Colorado, for instance, with Fiddler's Green, now Red Rocks is far enough away from residents, and Fiddler's is in the middle of a commercial area. So a lot of that sound is muted. But when it comes to this type of venue that they put down here, for profit, now nonprofit, which is, we're still trying to work that out, how that became a nonprofit, but they actually put this in the middle, within 1/8 of a mile of existing family residences. So it was wrong from the start.
Did that answer your question about the nonprofit or
yeah,
not?
that's great. And can you just describe, aside from a non-answer, can you describe some of the answers you've gotten from the local government council? Do they think economic value is more important, or they think the noise effects are being exaggerated by the community? What appears to be their thinking?
It's just that it's good for the city in terms of tax revenue. So
Yeah.
bad, so sad.
But they also claimed it was going to create jobs for the local community. And this particular venue is using third-party vendors to come in and provide the services during these concerts. He does hire off-duty police for security, but we were told through the development process that if you had an issue, you could call the police and they'll ask him to turn it down. And that's been done hundreds of times, and it hasn't panned out.
Well, I mean, for instance, the latest twist that the city has done is they say, well, we're going to issue our local variance permit just for the area right around the theater. And but it doesn't extend beyond, say, this major roadway where most of the communities start. And they state very specifically that municipal and state laws are still in full effect outside of this Polaris Point complex. So if you're in that neighborhood, which we tried last year, and you call the police, they say, sorry, it's a permitted event. They won't respond. They just say, just write a letter of complaint. So, it's just a problem.
Can you explain, you said you developed, how did the map work? How did you get the word out and get people to engage with it? And was any of the material you collected, was that used in court at all, even statistics?
Well, we're just starting with the court aspect of it, so,
Okay.
But the plaintiffs obviously have their data, which has been submitted, so can't really talk about that. But I mean, what we've tried to do is standardize our data collection. For instance, for people in the community, if you're wanting to collect data, two apps that you can use on your phone that are peer reviewed, that are really the two best, are the NIOSH phone app and the SLA Pro, it's SLA Analyzer Pro app. There's in Applied Acoustics, there was a review of the best phone apps, and those two were at the very top. The SLA Pro was like #1. And the data I showed you that I had colored in was from the SLA Sound Level Analyzer app. So we're trying to standardize our data in terms of devices.
And when it does come to a lawsuit, you need to keep in mind there was a lawsuit that was presented prior to the development being built. And that judge found that it wasn't right. So for instance, his analysis was the venue was not built, so we don't know if they're going to exceed Colorado Statute 2512-103. So he dismissed that case. And now, since we've collected all this data and finally have an organized group, and the key was the Colorado Supreme Court ruling, which occurred in 2025. That set precedent and gave us an opportunity to truly now try and get the venue to abide by the law and turn it down.
I have a legal question. When the city is not enforcing the state law, is there an opportunity to go to the state attorney general?
Well, we tried that and never even got a response. So, we could try it again, but the first attempt was a total no-go.
Mm-hmm. And for any reason? I mean, was it really pushed, or did you just?
Yeah, I asked our lawyer a while back about this thing is that didn't cities have a duty? I'm used to being a retired physician. There was always a duty. If you didn't satisfy your duty, you could get sued, And so I said, doesn't the city have a duty to enforce the law? And the answer was no. The city does not have a duty to enforce the law. So, this has just been an eye opener for a lot of us. I mean, again, when this thing first appeared on the horizon, we were 1 mile away. We were on this ridge, staring right down at it, and we were like, well, we're a mile away, and I mean, there's laws and all. And then we see in the paper, the laws have just been waived.
And a reason for that, Jamie, could possibly be that the mayor at the time of approval has now joined the attorneys representing the amphitheater. That is correct. So there's this little circle of trust that's going on within the city, because I truly believe they thought this was going to be a big money maker.
Mm-hmm.
And so far that has not panned out.
I think they only have like 14 or 15 events this year so far.
And so not just us, when you look at social media on Nextdoor or on Facebook, in regards to the venue, and its entertainment coming in, you're seeing it's too high priced. It's B-list individuals, meaning bands. And the comments are, well, if he got some really good musicians in there, up-to-date musicians, or then they'd be willing to spend $150 or so to sit around a fire pit or to sit in a premium seat. So the words kind of get, and I think the industry as a whole is having issues because of the economy and the expense. When you think about it, to go to a concert now for a couple, it could be $300 for the tickets and then a couple drinks, and you're up to $400. You have to pay for parking. That was the other issue. They really don't have enough room for parking at this venue. So Bass Pro actually allows them to park in their parking lot, and then they have to walk over. But there's premium parking spots, which is another $50 added on. So overall, this type of, when we went to concerts, it was what, $12 to get in, right? It was economical, wages kept up with the cost of living. Now things are changing in our economy, and this industry is being impacted.
So another question I had, when you've made your case, I mean, statistics are one thing and they can be very compelling, but some of the stories, Matt, that you had listed in your slide, veterans that have PTSD or an autistic child, how powerful do those stories become or not? I don't quite understand how people can not respond to that.
Well, it was powerful at the state legislature.
Yeah, I remember that.
They did not take that for granted. They took that to heart.
Yeah.
And the city of Colorado Springs, especially us being a military town, let's face it, you have Fort Carson, you have the Air Force Academy. They are ignoring those exact issues when it comes to loud music, which is not acceptable. And it kind of shows who's in charge.
This thing of, sound levels and being, a stickler for, you might say, the absolute literal code is still playing out. For instance, in the judge's opinion that they just gave us to dismiss the venue's 12B motion for dismissal, the judge states, I'm just going to paraphrase it, that that an event such as this can be a public nuisance, even if they don't violate the technical sound levels in the Noise Abatement Act. And, again, but this gets back again to this thing of how are you going to measure these sound levels? The theater's been very, skilled at saying, no, we're using 5-minute averages. We are not going to report any kind of LMAX metric. We're not going to use LMAX. We're not going to use L1. We're not going to use true background. You're just going to get a 5-minute average. And so, for instance, if you look on some of the data from the city's consultant, you can have 48 to 50 decibel 5-minute averages, but the real data is very often 55 to 64. It's just all being averaged. So this comes down to, it's going to be a matter for the judge to I think the judge is going to have to sort this out and try to, kind of do like what she sounded like she was doing, was to understand, yes, there's a technical aspect, but there's a human aspect too.
Among compromises that have been considered, has just simply turning down the volume at all times been one of the options? Is that something? Yeah.
But they just don't. They just, again, I think that basically this operation is not going to do anything unless a judge instructs them to.
And what is also being echoed on social media are the individuals that go to these concerts saying it is too loud inside the venue. It's almost overbearing. It's not enjoyable. So that they're hearing this on that angle as well. It's not just the residents being impacted. And you're seeing people are saying, well, I'm not going to go to that concert. I'm not going to go to that venue again because it's too loud inside.
Do you see any, well, are there residents or organized residents who are fighting for the loud sound?
No,
No.
no. I mean, there's some people that will say, "Oh, it doesn't bother me that much," or "Oh, they're having fun," or a lot of people are just afraid. They don't want to complain. There's a segment of the population that simply, I guess, you hear the term sheeple now and then, that they will just take anything. And for me, I mean, I think I'm pretty flexible. I mean, if this was going on a couple times a year, 5, 6 times a year, we never would have moved. I never would have said anything. But this first, their first season, they compressed, I think it was 20 or some shows into half the season. So we were getting like 3 or 4 events sometimes a week. And it was just terrible. I mean, people literally were fleeing their homes. Our neighbor was, they still are fleeing their home. They schedule trips. People are abandoning their homes.
Or
And,
move.
or move. And
Yeah.
to be totally fair, sometimes the events are not bad at all, or sometimes you can't hear them. This is the problem with outdoor type of venues, is that the temperature and the wind have such dramatic effects on how sound travels. Sound likes cool air. The theater is a nice warm place. It has lights and people breathing. And here in Colorado, it's cool, so the sound goes straight up over the sound wall. And then when it hits warm air, it bends out and it goes off to the side, sometimes for miles. And then when you add the wind in, the wind can start to bend the sound waves 2 miles away. We live 4 miles away from the amphitheater now, in a different city actually, and we have had a few events where you can still hear it in the house 4 miles away.
And if any of your listeners wish to go to the noise map, that will identify that. You'll be able to click on houses as far as 4 miles away and read what those individuals are witnessing the nights of these concerts. So yes, if Yo-Yo Ma's playing with the Colorado Symphony, or if there's a comedian on stage, you're gonna hear anything. It's where it should be.
It's like that first graph I
The
showed you.
first graph, yes.
Yeah, of the comedian. The LAQs, the averages were starting out about 45, 46, and they had a continual linear fit down to about 40 at 11 o'clock at night. That's the way the community is, and you shouldn't have these roller coaster like gyrations up to 55 or 65 decibel 5 minute averages. Again, this 5 minute, that's the thing that just shocked me as I've gotten into this, that these 5 minute average, and I mean, and the in sound engineering industry, a 5 minute average is still considered a relatively short average. I totally get that. I'm not saying they shouldn't use it. I'm just saying that the industry will also say that you cannot use a single metric like a 5 minute average without having a metric that is also demonstrating Lmax, like an L1, the percentile metric L1. You also really should be monitoring the flat, the dBz low frequencies. We're just starting to get into that right now, but that there's, again, as you said, Jamie, the DBA, you cannot just monitor a community by a single DBA LEQ. You just can't. Well, not effectively, you know.
There's a
If we
suggestion.
have,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
if we have just a minute, I'd like to bring up this question about that came in about real estate values.
Yeah. Well, I can tell
Yeah.
you our experience if you want, because we sold. By chance, we did manage to get an offer the first day. Okay, I was shocked. But it was let's just say, a younger individual who actually now is playing loud music on his porch and bothering our old neighbors. So let's just, we had dinner with our old neighbors, and he said they had to go over in the middle of the night. He was on his porch and asked him to turn his music off. So let's just say it just attracts a different element.
Yes.
But I would have to say there are individuals that have bought and now are realizing this is a big problem. That's being indicated through Nextdoor and Facebook, because it's hard to get a group together otherwise without social media. But there are a lot of homes for sale. Let's face it, across the country though, but more so up in this area. And keep in mind, a lot of people moved up here for retirement purposes. This wasn't, this was a great place to raise a family and retire in because it was peaceful, quiet, and it's become very chaotic. And that's why you're seeing this negativity against the amphitheater. And I believe in the long run, the truth does prevail, and we're beginning to find that out with our court case.
The one thing I might mention just to you guys, because I think this would be something to hear maybe your answer or to just think about, is at the Capitol, what we ran into was that the powers that be were trying to minimize, say, a 55, 60, 65 decibel sound. Again, they never give the metrics. They just say, oh, well, 60, 65 decibels, that's like a normal conversation. And then you have, a senator or somebody say, well, that's no big deal, a normal conversation. It's just like a room conversation. And I'm like, like rewind here. Okay, this is in a community where your background would be like 40 decibels as a 5-minute average. And you're going up to a 55 to 60 or 65 decibel 5-minute average with amplified bass with periodic impulsive noise. I mean, it's this old thing of they're two totally different types of noise. You cannot compare room conversation noise to industrial amplified periodic impulsive concert noise. But by the time you say that, their eyes have glazed over and they're looking around because they're bored. So that's the one thing I have found with this is it's very difficult to explain this to people because there's a little bit of technicality involved and they're just not that interested.
Mm-hmm.
But technicality aside, the recordings that I presented just show how absurd it is. And hopefully the judge will take those to heart when we eventually
and the duration of it and the frequency of it. Frequency meaning how many events you're being exposed to.
Yes.
And the fact, people become increasingly sensitized.
Yes.
It might be a little bit annoying at first, but on the second, third, fourth time, it's just
and especially during the summer and on school nights. So a lot of things have changed from the original approval without any discussion with the public. It was supposed to be Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Now anytime anybody he can get in there, he's getting in there. Things have changed without any discussion on our behalf. And basically what we were told from that evening it's not happening on behalf of the developer or the city or the county for that matter.
The one thing just to mention real quick is I really wanted to bring it out. Sound level is not loudness. This is something that comes out over and over in the sound engineering literature. Loudness is a perceived subjective response based on sound level, frequency, time variability, duration, and context. That's why loudness and loudness level are different units. Sound pressure or is sown. I mean loudness. There's loudness and then loudness level. One is sown and one is fawn. It's a totally different unit, and that's because loudness is not directly related to sound level. For instance, you can lower a dBA level and it'd be louder because you have more bass frequencies. That there's not this direct relationship. And you mentioned duration. Duration is a classic example, is that you could have something going on, say, for 3 minutes or 3 hours. The sound level is the same. Everything else is the same. But a population will perceive and rate the longer duration sound as louder just by duration because it's a subjective response.
Yeah.
Jamie, do you have a closing comment or I can?
Well, I want to thank Matt and Murray for this presentation. I think it's a great community story. It's a good model for other communities dealing with the same thing. Your push on being persistent, having tools, measuring all these things I think are very valuable. And I really wish you good luck.
Quiet Communities.